All right, buckle up because today we're taking a deep dive into some Maywood, Illinois politics. And this one is a doozy. We're looking into the Maywood Park District, and there's some real drama brewing there. We've been poring over legal documents and meeting minutes, news articles, even some pretty spicy social media posts to try and piece together what's going on with this park district. So are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it. I think the best place to start is back in 2006. Maywood residents actually voted to get rid of the village's recreation department completely and just give it all to the Maywood Park District. Over 2,000 residents voted yes on the referendum. Seems like a pretty clear mandate, right?
Yeah, you'd think that would be the end of it. But get this, that transfer never actually happened. For almost 20 years, the village just kept collecting all the money that should have gone to the park district, recreation revenue and all that. While the park district itself was struggling to take control of the actual parks and all the facilities.
Yep, that's exactly right. And that's really where this whole conflict starts. So now let's fast forward to 2021. Mayor Booker gets elected on a platform of, unity and collaboration, all that good stuff. He even signed an intergovernmental agreement, an IGA, with the park district president at the time, Dr. June Price Shingles. It seemed like he was finally going to make good on that 2006 referendum,
But wait a minute, wasn't Price Shingles part of Booker's Maywood Together group, along with Jeffrey Dean Harris? It sounds like they were all on the same page, at least at first.
That's right. They were all in it together. Until 2023, that is. Both Price Shingles and Harris end up resigning, amid all these accusations about financial mismanagement, no less. And there were even some rumors floating around that they were purposely trying to, break down the park district from the inside.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. And that's when Mayor Booker starts changing his tune. Right? He goes from being this big supporter of the park district to bashing their finances, saying it's a mess. He even starts suggesting that dissolving the whole thing might be for the best. It's a pretty big shift, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. It definitely makes you wonder what's going on. Did he genuinely have some sort of change of heart? Or was this IGA, this agreement he signed, was it all just part of some plan, like a way to get his allies into those positions and then advocate for getting rid of the park district later on? It's something to think about as we dig deeper.
Okay, let's get into those appointments you mentioned. Darrell Bass, Jeffrey Eaton Jr., and Reverend Jeremiah Brownlee. What can you tell us about those guys?
Well, those appointments were controversial right from the start, especially Eaton Jr. and Brownlee. There were a lot of questions about whether those two even lived in Maywood, which is, a legal requirement to be on the board.
Wait, so they might not have even been allowed to serve on the board in the first place. How did that happen?
That's the thing. It's not totally clear. It seems like the appointments were based on recommendations made to Commissioner Don Williams. But no one really knows how closely anyone checked if they actually lived in Maywood.
So did anyone try to challenge those appointments?
They did. The Park District's attorney found some evidence that suggested Eaton Jr. and Brownlee weren't actually residents. And the attorney asked them to prove that they lived there.
And did they?
Well, during a special board meeting, Eaton Jr. wouldn't show anyone any ID. He said he'd only provide it at a hearing. And Brownlee didn't even bother showing up. So then there was a motion to have a public hearing about it all. But get this, Commissioner Darrell Bass, one of the newly appointed members, voted against it.
He voted against a public hearing to, look into the evidence. That seems pretty fishy if you ask me.
It definitely does, because by refusing to have a public hearing, he basically stopped the board from potentially removing those two commissioners, even though they might not have been eligible to be on the board in the first place. So it makes you wonder about his motives, right? Was there some deliberate effort to stack the board with people who would vote a certain way about the park district's future?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, so let's talk about Mayor Booker's statements about all of this. He's been pretty vocal about saying the park district is mismanaging their money, right?
Oh, yeah, he's been all over it. He even got into it with a resident on Facebook, listing out all these problems he claims are going on at the park district.
So let's hear it. What exactly is he accusing them of?
Wow. Booker was saying the park district had less than $310 in their bank account at one point, and that they had bounced payroll checks and weren't paying employee health insurance premiums. He claimed they had racked up over $474,000 in debt. Oh, and he also said they hadn't done a financial audit in 5 years, hadn't reconciled their budgets, and hadn't even made a budget to maintain the village-owned properties they were managing. If it's all true, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, that's a whole lot to take in. It does sound pretty concerning, but I'm wondering about the context here. Did Booker ever mention that the village had been keeping all that recreation revenue from the park district for years? It seems like that would have a huge impact on their finances, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. That's a really important point. It's easy to blame the park district for everything, but we need to look at the whole picture. Did the village contribute to these problems by not handing over the money like they were supposed to after that 2006 referendum? That's something we should definitely investigate. And Commissioner Dawn Williams actually put out a statement about all this. She addressed those concerns about the park district not being transparent with meeting minutes and agendas. Williams said she had told the executive director to fix that problem and that anyone could request the minutes if they wanted them.
Okay, so there are two sides to every story, as they say. And it sounds like this conflict between the village and the park district goes way back, even before Mayor Booker. So what else did Booker say to defend himself?
Well, in that same Facebook exchange, he claimed the park district wasn't paying their utility bills or their vendors. Basically, he was trying to make it seem like they were totally incompetent and couldn't manage their money at all.
But again, how do we know how much of that was their fault versus problems caused by the village holding back their funding? This whole thing feels like everyone's just pointing fingers at each other.
It totally does. And it makes you wonder, what was Booker really trying to do here? Was he actually worried about the park district? Or was he just using those accusations to push for getting rid of it completely like he seemed to want to do?
Yeah, that's a good point. Speaking of agendas, remember that website we talked about before? The one Booker supposedly made for the park district during his campaign? What was that all about?
Oh, yeah, that website is a weird one. It looked like a real park district website, even had a place to sign up for a newsletter. But if you look at the code, it showed that all that information was actually going to Astute Culture, which is a consulting firm that Booker founded.
You're kidding. So people thought they were giving their contact info to the park district, but it was going straight to Booker's company. That's kind of shady, don't you think?
Yeah, it definitely raises some eyebrows. It makes you think, what was he planning to do with all that data? And it also makes you question if he really wanted to help the park district at all. Why make a website for them if you're trying to get rid of them?
All right, so let's recap. We've got potential financial mismanagement going on, some shady appointments to the board, a website that's secretly sending people's information to Booker's company, and a mayor who keeps changing his mind about whether he supports the park district.
Yeah.
This is getting more and more interesting.
It really is. And there's one more thing we need to go back to. That 2006 referendum. Remember, it was a legal requirement for the village to give all the parks and rec facilities to the Maywood Park District.
Right, and that never happened. For almost 20 years, the village just ignored that legal obligation.
Exactly. And that creates this really complicated backdrop for everything that's going on now. Was Booker's push to dissolve the park district just a continuation of this long-running feud? Or was there something else going on?
It's like a giant puzzle where every piece you try to fit in just leads to more questions.
It really is.
But there are laws that govern all of this, right? You mentioned the Park District Code and the Election Code earlier.
Right. Those codes lay out the rules for things like creating and dissolving park districts. So it's important to look at whether Booker was following those rules or not.
For example, the Election Code says that city employees and elected officials aren't allowed to promote or circulate petitions for referendums. But didn't we see evidence that suggested Booker was involved in circulating petitions to get a binding referendum on the ballot?
We did. And if that's true, it means he might have broken the law. It also makes his claim that he was just trying to do what's best for the community seem a little less believable.
Yeah, it does. It seems like there's a pattern here. Booker says he's all about transparency and accountability, but his actions don't really match up with that.
Exactly. And that difference between what he says and what he does makes you question his leadership and what he's really after.
So what does this all mean for the people of Maywood? They voted for someone who promised to bring everyone together, but now they're stuck in this power struggle. And it could have some serious consequences.
It's a tough situation, for sure. And it shows how important it is for citizens to be informed and involved. People need to know what's going on in their community and hold their elected officials accountable.
I agree. But with all this back and forth and conflicting information, it's hard to know who to believe or what to trust.
It can be.
So what advice would you give to Maywood residents, or even people in other communities who are dealing with similar problems?
I would say stay engaged. Go to board meetings, ask questions, and demand transparency. The more informed people are, the better they'll be able to handle these complicated situations and fight for what's best for their community.
This is a lot to think about. Where does this all leave the Maywood Park District? What happens to their parks and programs now?
That's the million-dollar question. Those non-binding referenda that were on the ballot back in November didn't really give us any answers. And the park district's finances are still a mess. It's a tough spot for everyone involved, the employees, and the people who rely on those parks and programs.
Yeah, I can imagine. And let's not forget about the people who actually work at the park district.
Yeah.
They kept showing up and doing their jobs through all this drama, even with delayed paychecks and all the uncertainty about their future.
You're right. They deserve a lot of credit. They were serving seniors, kids, people with disabilities, even with all this chaos going on around them. It just shows how dedicated they are and how important those programs are to the community.
It really does. It's easy to get caught up in the politics and the money.
Dawn Williams, the park district president, she's been pretty outspoken, hasn't she?
Yeah, she claims the village has been sabotaging them every step of the way.
That they've been holding them back, preventing them from doing their job.
Exactly. And she's not mincing words when it comes to the village's financial practices.
It's like a big blame game with everyone pointing fingers. So is this really about improving parks and recreation for the people of Maywood? Or is it just a power grab? We've got accusations flying, potential legal issues, and more questions than answers.
But this is about real people and their lives. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the big takeaway for our listeners? What can we learn from all this drama in Maywood?
I think the main thing is that local government matters, maybe more than we realize. It affects our quality of life, our community, even our parks. And this whole situation shows how important it is for us to be involved and engaged citizens.
What do you mean by that? What can people actually do to make a difference?
Well, first of all, stay informed. Read the local news, go to board meetings, ask those hard questions. We need to hold our elected officials accountable for what they do and how they make decisions. Remember, knowledge is power.
So it's not enough to just know what's happening. We have to actively participate in the process.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to speak up. You have a voice, and it can make a difference.
Well said. This has been a fascinating look into the world of Maywood politics. It's a story that reminds us that things aren't always what they seem.
And that we need to be careful and think critically about what we see and hear, especially when it comes to local government.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's a good reminder that the fight for a better government starts right